Back. We're reunited, and it feels so good. Good show. Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Ben Ennis, JD Bunkis, and back from his Western vacation. Sees his brother get married. Justin Bourne in studio. Buddy,
I feel a little bit like the treadmill is like, what's max? I don't know. I never move it above 7. But I feel like it's like maxed out just looking at JD, and you guys are about to throw me on the Marner treadmill right now, and I'm supposed to run and keep pace with this.
Oh. You've had time to get acclimated. I saw you tweeting out how you got a new pointer to read as many things as possible.
The dorkiest thing.
By the way, you should see this thing. It's incredible.
I've seen it. You tweeted a picture.
Yeah, I know. Just talked about it. What are you talking about?
Yes, I'm not saying I'm uninformed. I'm saying I am unprepared for the pace. I've tuned into the show a little bit. Mm-hmm. And
hold on. Give me a second.
This is the nicest compliment we've ever received.
This is also a lie, but a couple times I've come across clips on Twitter.
Okay.
And JD's pace he's got feelings about the Marner.
I'm going to try to slow it down. Okay, let me start it by saying this. I really did think people were going to want to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
They do.
Especially when John Tavares signed here. I thought, wow, people are going to want to come to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Yeah. I didn't realize it was going to be because the GM would just hand everyone exactly what they wanted in terms of money and deal. That's all. I thought it was going to be something where Toronto was, a real destination point for guys where they said, you know what, there would be sacrifices to accomplish something here. And you know why is that, we talk a lot about hometown discounts and how sometimes they've been predatory to players and they've been unfair to players and that, you know what? There have been instances where guys signed really crap deals and for the wrong reasons. And I thought that what was going to shake out here was somewhere in between, right? That it was going to be a situation where guys no longer took these deals that a couple of years from now we looked at and said, oh my God, like Nathan McKinnon's, right? Mm-hmm. Or even John Tavares when he was with the Islanders. Like Tavares' first contract, we all looked at a year later, like everyone was doing the cover half your face and look in the opposite direction because we couldn't believe how much money he left on the table for the quote unquote hockey culture stuff that would, if you're going to be really the captain of this team, how much are you willing to sacrifice to be that? And for too long, that stuff happened. But also, there is a precedent to hockey in knowing that it takes more than a couple of guys. This isn't the NBA where you can simply have LeBron James and it's going to get you to a finals every year. Like, depth might be overrated. We're about to find out. But I think it has some value with the Leafs. And I always thought that while guys cared about getting their money, that they also cared to make sure that in a salary cap league, there was going to be enough to keep cores together. And for the Leafs young guys, that does not appear to be the case. Because ultimately what has been done here by giving these guys these contracts, they hurt you at depth at the deadline. They hurt you in retention of players that, like when Kasperi Kapanen comes up for his next deal and Andreas Johnsson, both those guys in 3 seasons, I can guarantee you something, that you will not see both of them re-signed. That when Freddie Anderson comes up, who's like Austin Matthews' best friend on the team, I think, when he's up in 2 years, you think that's getting done? When Travis Dermott comes up as an RFA next year, is he going to be the first guy that decides that he's going to take a lot less if he ends up playing half a season with Morgan Riley and is effective at it? It's just the culture around the team is not what I expected it to be from a buy-in standpoint. And I can't fault players for wanting to get as much as possible and securing their future. But what I can fault is the sell job that has been given to them and the order in which the contracts have been doled out and the way that it created an atmosphere where guys were looking in each other's backyards and it was causing them to have real anxiety about their situations with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sit here and say it sounds naive, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds naive to be like, I thought the Leafs would, for the greater good, would take less money. It sounds naive because it's pro sports, and these guys are athletes who are able to get a lot of money. And at the end of the day, I think pretty much everyone is trying to do that. What I think is different with the Leafs core is they have been sold as this Toronto Maple Leafs team. They are going to be the unit that moves this team to win a Stanley Cup, or maybe they don't, but whatever. They're the Toronto Maple Leafs, those guys. I feel like when you've seen sell jobs in the past, you've had a core in place before the sell job. You've had Sidney Crosby take a cheaper deal before you try to sell it to the next guy and say Sid did it, or you've had generally you've seen the main part of the team. The Boston Bruins had guys like Bergeron and Chara that weren't making zillions of dollars saying to the next guys, well, we're not paying any more than those guys. They're the team. These guys have come up as the team in Toronto, in the media mecca, here for hockey. And I think this happens to also be a core that likes the celebrity and does view the dollar figure a little bit as a point system in a different way. So it's circumstantial. I also believe that the Marner contract coming up as it did last, when so many moves were made to accommodate a Marner contract, gave them more leverage than we kind of realized.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so much of what Dubas did would have been like, well, what'd I do that for?
Well, yeah, right. Yeah, it was like, what was the conversation we were having with CJ the other week? It was like, what is the actual maximum they could give to Marner without making a move on the team? He's like, yeah, $11 million.
Yeah, 10.893.
Oh, it's like, oh, shocker that Mitch Marner wanted close to $11 million. But what I am interested also in the part of what you said and about the core and the first guy to say, I'm not maxing out my dollar figure. Like, where is the patient zero here? Mm-hmm. Who's the first guy that started this? Was it Nylander? Because, okay, we can talk about the contract, and depending on his production this year, could be actually a pretty good value, but he pushed it right into the limit, and there were a lot of people at the time that thought that was an overpay. Was it Tavares? I don't think so. Guy was a UFA. Was it Matthews then? Is Matthews the guy that we should have been looking at first of all? It's like, you're the potential next captain of this hockey team. All right, if this is going to happen, if what we've talked about and what people have dreamed about in this city is actually going to happen, you have to be the guy. Because if you're not, nobody else is doing it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think there was such a fear from within the organization of going to war with Austin Matthews publicly like this. Like had this conversation been about Matthews, it would have been a lot worse. I feel like I just felt like they were in a position where they didn't even want this to be part of the conversation with Matthews. So I think they kind of knowingly said, yeah, we're going above and beyond maybe what we could do here, but we just don't want to deal with that with Matthews. To me, it's probably the Nylander situation where Willie, at the time we thought, we didn't hate the deal in here, but in general, people hated that contract, I would say. And so him pushing it to the very limits probably said to everyone else, well, if he's getting 7, what's Matthews worth? And maybe that did set a little bit of a trend, but it's a unique situation here. And I think it's really hard to look at these contracts individually to pull them out of the context in which they were signed, in which order, for which needs and all that. Because I don't think there are comparables around the league where another GM had to do something like this.
So I find your point about the leverage so good because it's obvious. Yeah. And yet it's one of those things where, when someone invents something and you get pissed off because you're like, why didn't I invent that?
Like the reader pointer that I...
Yeah,
no, I like that. Something different than that.
Something actually that has a function in society, something like that.
That's disappointing.
But it's like, yeah.
Because, most people can read.
Yeah, but no,
without a pointer.
But it's so true. The Leafs sacrificed a first-round pick to get off the Marlowe money.
Right.
Like, they gave up a first to make sure they had money to sign Marner.
Every move they made was like, so we can sign Mitch.
Right. You don't sign Marner, and it's like, wait, what about that first-round pick that we just gave away?
Yeah.
It's like, well,
rather have Patrick Marleau on the wing and $6 million.
Exactly.
And Darren Ferris, he has cap-friendly, too. He's like, so what is it, LTIR? So it was $11 million. Look at that.
Right. And I think that's a really
place.
good point that probably was a little bit under-discussed. I'm critical of Dubas in some areas, but the one place I actually feel some empathy for him is just when he was dropped in. Like, everyone assumes because he was the assistant GM or that he was being groomed and that he was a part of this group that, like, he has an ownership of this team that I don't really think he actually has. Like, the Marlies are not the Maple Leafs. And being the assistant GM is not being the GM. Like, he was not at the forefront of the Nylander things. He's learning. I don't think he's necessarily a bad general manager. Like, I think that's a really impossible take to have at this tenure of his. Like, we're just seeing his first actual team, one that he's like kind of constructed and said, this is what I believe in. I think skill all the way through, and we're going to go for a certain type of thing. And I'm doubling down on Babcock, and I've made this trade for Barry. Like, now it really has a full feel of Kyle Dubas' team. Last year, it didn't really have that. It was still the group that he inherited. And what ended up happening here is he walked into the Leafs at this extremely critical juncture. And I'm sorry, we can point to all the experience that he's had in the Sioux, and we can point to the experience that he had with the Marlies. He had no experience as an NHL general manager negotiating massive contracts, especially at a time where, there really does seem to be a shift in terms of what RFAs are going to get paid. And so I think him learning from Nylander was, okay, you can't wait this long to start talking to guys. all right, okay, check. When he came in and said we can and we will, I think he was like, I've been a part of this. These guys like me. He was probably their choice to be general manager. Like when he started and all of a sudden it was facial hair and, all of a sudden we're going for skill, that those guys probably like that thing, right? That they would have viewed Dubas as a bit of an ally. And I think that his 2 lessons were negotiating with Nylander too late and learning that order of contracts mattered and that it was actually imperative for the team to get those deals done in the same summer all together. Everyone should have been banged out the same summer as John Tavares. We kind of kicked that can down the road and it bit him in the ass big time because it had to be that way. Once you let Nylander go first and push you like that, you're right. Why was Matthews going to take anything less? And now with Marner, it's like he's in this spot where he looks like a sap if he even takes market value. And so I think that the real difficulty in this was there was a mistake up top by giving Dubas the GM job when they gave it to him. And there was a mistake on Dubas's part to not try to draw a harder line in the sand with Marner from the very beginning.
So a couple takes on that. First off, I think if you asked Dubas, if he could do over, what would he do over? He would look back and he would say he'd let Nylander sit out. I think that it was a situation where we're kind of revisionist about that Nylander contract, that he let him wait till December 1st, last minute they signed him, he caved, whatever. Sitting there, all of us would have said, this is a chance to win the Stanley Cup. And if they miss a swing at this pitch, if they pass on this season, they lose in Game 7 and they don't have Willie Nylander, even though we know how it ended up, if he had missed out on Nylander that year, we'd have said he failed. Right? So I think there was, he decided to take a swing at that pitch and consider that a year where he thought they could win the Stanley Cup. So I think that pressed him.
Whoops.
Right. Because in retrospect, he'd let him sit out, set the precedent that he will let you sit out. All of a sudden, he's a totally different looking
He's the
GM.
guy first day in prison, and he beats up a guy, right? It's like, that guy's crazy. He'll let William Nylander sit out the whole season. They can win a Stanley Cup. They don't care. 60-point guy, they're waving goodbye. Whatever. He tells us we got to sign something, we better sign it.
Yeah, and if the fax machine doesn't work at 4:59 that day, he looks like a hard ass, and all of a sudden he's tough to negotiate with. He ends up doing Nylander, and all of a sudden, I think that changes the tone a little bit for everyone else. I do agree with you, JD, on the point that the order it was done in and the way they let them wait. And it's easy to look at that with Dubas and say, well, first-time GM, and he's learning and all that. But that's a Lou Lamoriello thing, to wait. Lou Lamoriello's staple, if there were core tenets of his beliefs of how to run a hockey team, one of them is, if you have time, use it. He'll let contracts go to the very end. His theory was, if these players turn out to be stars, we'll happily pay them then. If they turn out to be stars, let's make them prove they're stars first. Well, they proved they were stars. So I think that's a lesson that Kyle took from Lou, and a lot of people are saying Lou wouldn't let this happen. This is a Lou lesson that Kyle learned.
Here's the only problem is Austin Matthews had already scored 40 goals.
Yeah.
He was like, let's see what he can do. He did it. He had 40 goals as a rookie.
Yeah. Game 1, he scored 4.
Yeah, maybe.
Game 2, they should have been here's the contract.
The writing was kind of on the wall with that one.
But who would have known? First overall pick,
Right.
And no one really complains about the Matthews.
Yeah.
Do they?
Well, I don't complain about the
What would you have got him for? 9-6 a year earlier? I don't know.
I'm never going to say what I would have got them for because, guess what? I'm not a good GM. I'm not a general manager. There's a reason that I'm sitting here and not there. Actually, there's not one reason.
Yeah,
there's
I was going to say there's a multitude.
1,000 reasons. We don't have time to go through them all. I think my greater point is that I do have the benefit of hindsight. This is what we do, right? We play the results.
Yeah.
This is
You're
the
supposed
business.
to be smarter than us.
Right. Exactly. But even at the time, it was, well, why aren't they getting the Matthews deal done now? And it's I even remember listening to, I think it was 31 Thoughts, and Merrick and Elliot were talking about how maybe there's a little bit of that maybe going first or having your best player go first can be a bit of a myth. It's not 100% proven theory. It doesn't necessarily have to happen. But I think in this case, it was important to make sure that you didn't let those guys go into those seasons and just rack it up and get paid. Especially the worst one continues to be Marner because you got John Tavares. You didn't have, let's see if he'll prove to be a star. Well, here's the thing. Every single person who's played next to John Tavares throughout his career has inflated their point totals.
And then you
has looked like a star.
A great player beside him in Marner.
Right.
Yeah.
Not just a great player, one of the perfect fits in his entire career. Mitch Marner.
Which is probably a reasonable argument for giving him a lot of money to keep him. But
I mean, it is.
Right.
But it's also that going into the season, you either had to have one of two things. The Marner deal in place, knowing that he was going to pop off with a guy who can easily score 40 goals. Obviously Tavares was going to be in that range. Like, what would have been a disappointing year for Tavares? 32 goals, 33 goals?
Legit.
Like, honestly,
Yeah.
that's what we were working with as a baseline here for this player. So putting him with a good playmaker and putting them on a power play unit that was stacked with those guys, it seemed pretty clear that they would be able to have a point total that they went to and said, hey, look at this. We're going to have this, especially when communicating with your coaching staff that you were going to try him out more as a penalty killer and that his role was going to be expanded with the team and that they were going to be the top line without a doubt. And if you didn't have that contract in place, you had to know that the player and his camp were cognizant that the opportunity of playing with this player was going to equate to a higher point total and an inflated value when we all strip down things and try to make comparables around the league. And like those two things don't seem to be accounted for. And especially when you look at it with all the other stuff, like...
Well, we're looking at it again, though, with hindsight playing the results. Because you're saying...
But to me, those are easy things to project.
What was John Tavares' highest goal total before this past season? 36? Maybe a bad season for Tavares is 27. Maybe it's 25. You know, it's really easy to look back at the season and say, you're talking about they're going to get a shot on the penalty kill. Well, we didn't know that was going to pan out. No. You know, that could have been an unmitigated disaster.
Here's the thing. If this is a one-off, then I'm looking at it and saying, okay, well, you know what? You made a mistake on that one, or you misread that one. But it's now 3 misreads. Like, it's 3 misreads on all
the
3 of the guys.
A misread?
Well, yeah, because it took you into the season.
Yeah.
Like
I wonder what the contracts would look like if they did Marner second. Like what if you flip when Marner and Matthews are done? What's Matthews in line for this summer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good
12,
question.
13,
because Marner, his comparable, if he's only using internal comparables, and I would hope he's not using John Tavares, who was a UFA, but he's using the $7 million of Nylander. He's like, yeah. Okay, so we're doing it. So they're both negotiating after this past season. Yeah. So he has his 94-point season. He's looking at Nylander and he's like, well, I'm at least $2 million better than Nylander, right? Like it's at least 9, but he doesn't have the 11.6 of Matthews to go on. So it's probably less. The thing I'm,
Marner's less for sure, I think, but Matthews' number I think might be more.
It's just here's what we can
say. Matthews is clearly making the argument I'm worth more than Marner, and he is.
Outside of losing one of those guys to just a walk away, you can't get it done, and you end up having to trade them for cents on the dollar. We know that this was not the proper route to go because every single one of these guys got paid above what we thought the market value was. Like Austin Matthews' contract in terms of what he's getting per annum is totally in line with what you'd be happy to pay a guy like that. It's just that, he only got 5 years term. Like he did change the market. Like you can look at that deal and say whatever you want. That did change the market. It's the first contract of its kind where a player got term and dollar value.
But the question is, okay, so all those guys are good. And I think we all agree are going to be good for the duration of those contracts,
you have to love that you have these 3 guys through the years you have them.
Right. Like, what's the guy you have most questions about? It's Nylander, but I think we view, like, even the first 20 games, take that out of the sample of last year, and he's pretty much William Nylander. He's good. It's the rest of the team now. And if you're Kyle Dubas, if you said you can and you will and you got it done, now you're like, okay, I understand the challenges with building a roster outside of these guys, but I know how we're going to do it. Like maybe that's the case, but man, it's really hard to look at next season and beyond, especially on the blue line, considering you only have Morgan Riley there, as how you're going to build around this team. But the starting point of having these forwards, I don't think is anyone arguing that you're a better team without any of those forwards under contract, even if you think they're overpaid.
No, and I really believe that the way they look at this team is you're trying to win the Stanley Cup each year, and Mitch Marner is in camp after a day with everyone. This is it. We've talked for years about when the window and when it is, and they're expiring, or sorry, their entry level contracts are going to be up, and this is it. This year they're intact, they're healthy, they're there, and then even filling in around them, like having Tyson Barrie for $2.5 million and finding clever ways to be good at the fringes is something that you believe Kyle Dubas can do that other teams don't have, right? That was the idea of having Boy Wonder or whatever you want to call him.
Or they think Sandin and Liljegren are going to be the second coming when they arrive next year.
They are now in a position with the core in place, with a GM who you believe is going to find the inefficiencies that makes them better, that finds a way at those fringes. So here we are. To me, sure, you don't love the contracts. I understand that, and I think you're right. They're more than they should have been for. They're more than market value. They're not good deals. They're not terrible deals, though, and I think we're about to find out if Kyle Dubas has been worth the hype.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, right? Like we're still, it's going to be something where there's a patient approach to judging all this.
And maybe that's just like his skill isn't, it's not contracts, it's like the other stuff. It's like, hey, contracts, give me a C on that. A plus on player acquisition and finding diamonds in the rough.
I think there are two major disappointments for me. One is that by having these guys on these deals, I'm sorry, but it does cut down your wiggle room and your level of patience, right? Because now these guys are already paid like super duper stars. And so the expectation is Stanley Cup. And so you don't have as much time to figure things out around the fringes.
Like I think the things around the fringes are figured. You love Kapanen deal. You love the Johnson deal. You love guys like Moore. Barry and Muzzin being there. You love the fringe moves.
That being, again, moving forward now, you can't make a deal at the deadline because you don't have any cap space to bring somebody in. You can't make a deal in the offseason that doesn't require moving one of those big pieces and keeping someone like, if Jake Muzzin and Tyson Barrie end up being the number one pairing on this team, you're going to lose your number one pairing next year. Like, that's really on the table. You maybe can keep one of those guys, hoping that for whatever reason they've decided to stay here. But maybe like that involves winning or at least being close to winning. Because so far, again,
when they leave, you're going to have $6.5 million in cap space for a defenseman.
I'm just saying that so far this team has not advanced past the first round. Like, I called them Chicago without the cups to some friends earlier in the like the other weekend, this weekend.
Yeah.
But I meant it because it's like, this is the kind of deals that the Chicago guys got. The whole idea around the Leafs was always that they needed to win on the rookie deals because they weren't going to be able to surround the team with that much talent. This year, they still have quite a bit. I don't think you've lost anything off the roster that's like crippling you in a certain way. Like, losing Jake Gardiner hurts, but you should be able to supplement him on the roster by replacing him with Tyson Barrie and having more balance, right? Like, they've been able to figure it out for year one. I think it's going to get really tricky. Gardner. I think people are looking at these deals like, well, they're going to look great in a couple of years. It's like, you don't have a couple of years. Like, you're going to lose guys immediately. You might lose your starting goaltender before you're ready to lose your starting goaltender. You might lose your top pairing. Hell, I don't think it's completely off the table that you might lose Morgan Rielly at this point. Like, that has to be something that they're really looking at and saying, how are we going to swing this thing if we're keeping all these guys up front? And so that is disappointment one. And disappointment two is that, like I said before, is that you didn't have a culture that impressed upon these guys the meaning of being a Leaf. And I know that this stuff gets overly sentimental and people are going to hammer me for this.
But it's fair. You're allowed to say that.
But it is something. Like, it does mean something to play in Toronto. It means more than playing in Arizona.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
It does.
This is the biggest hockey market on the planet. You know, in the States, Mitch Marner signs his deal and it's not on the front page of ESPN.com. In Canada, in Toronto, it dominates the entire summer of discussion. It's everything. And it's not for everyone, right? Like, some people don't like that.
That's another argument for these guys, though. It is for these kids, this particular group of kids.
Yeah,
so
nobody shies away from it.
But the problem is that there wasn't a buy-in to saying, guys, if you take just even market value, the patience the market's going to have for you, the love the market is going to have for you is going to be insurmountable. Yes, the love will be there if you win, but now there's no margin of in between. Like, this team loses and Mitch Marner comes up short, he's going to be a scapegoat. People are going to be not celebrating.
I don't know about that.
Oh, I'll tell you, man.
But that's sports, isn't it? Your best players don't perform.
No,
like, we were saying the same thing about, Matthews a couple of years ago when he had not a great postseason. Like, that's the deal. That's the deal with playing for this team with the expectations.
Yeah, except for, I think we historically know that athletes get judged based off their contract, like more so than ever as sports fans become more and more involved in their groups.
I don't know about historically, but recently.
Yeah, recently this has been the case. And the other thing is just that, like, again, you would have thought that playing in Toronto, not just because you're wearing the maple leaf on your sweater, but because of all of the things that, I tweeted about earlier in the week, whether it was like getting paid in Canadian or American and living in Canada, whether it was having world-class facilities, whether it was having world-class like visibility in terms of marketability, whether it was the chance to win with this really special group, that all of these things didn't equate into a single dollar of cap space is disappointing. Yeah. Like, it's fair to look at that and wonder, what the hell? Why is it that the Boston Bruins can get Charlie McAvoy on 4.9 on a bridge? And I know you said that, players come in at different tiers, and it's a good point, but why have other organizations been successful at this? Why am I seeing Travis Konechny signed today for $5 million on a 7-year deal? Like, it just...
Did he really?
Yeah.
That's terrible, Konechny and your agent. Don't sign for 7 years.
Hold on. I'm going to get it actually correct because I don't have it exactly.
I mean, that's a great deal for Philly. Wow.
It's 5.5 over 6.
Yeah. That's
okay.
So here's,
it's not everyone that's doing these deals. It's the Toronto Maple Leafs that are doing these deals.
So I agree with you. Here's my hot take in all this, in that if I were Mitch Marner sitting here today, whatever this has been, whatever he got this to 10.893. If I would be embarrassed, I would be a little bit embarrassed at how this went down. Not at the money, not at having tried to get every cent I was worth, because that's all well and good. But if it could have been for 10.1 and I wouldn't have had to get dragged through the coals publicly and questioned, and the value of just being the guy who it was easy and always wanted to be here and always wanted to be a part of it.
You don't get to do that.
You don't. I mean,
he didn't miss much, though. I mean, it was a story for a long time, and the 11 million.
He didn't miss much, but I think of him differently now.
Yes.
Like, had he just been the guy who was like, let's go. I'm a Leaf. Everyone loves me. I'm the dog who chases the tennis ball, and I get points. And like now it's like it really tainted the view of the player who you could have put in every damn Dempster's bread commercial or whatever it was you wanted to do.
He's going to be selling more than bread. He probably turns down bread.
I find him less palatable now than I would have. Not because of the dollars, but because of the fight. That's public leaks.
That's an excellent point. Is that he put out a video where it's the city skyline and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no place I would have wanted to be other than Toronto.
Okay.
And it's like your whole camp kept pushing it out there that you thought you were going to get an offer sheet, that you were waiting on an offer sheet, and that you turned down $11 million a year over 7 seasons. And essentially you wanted the same amount and you'd lopped off a year. Like, how do you sell yourself as the guy who wanted to be here and, you were desperate to be a Maple Leaf and nowhere else, and I didn't sign offer sheets? You didn't sign offer sheets because the other ones were lower, and you knew you were going to get your cake and eat it too.
Darren Ferris and their camp walking that back today. They're like, we had offer sheets just like we said we would, but also we always wanted to be here. And it's like, what, did you want to, or were the offer? This is terrible.
I'm just saying that.
I don't believe any of this.
You're right. Like the cost to...
But listen to Darren Ferris at 6 o'clock on Primetime Sports.
The cost to his image overall, to people that are people that are going to be on the fence on this thing, right? Like, this is who I want to talk to, because ultimately I know there are some people listening to this that are very pro Marner and they feel like the deal is a good one, and they've brought up the escalating salary cap and that it'll all be fine and that we're just the media.
I do believe he'll outperform the dollars, just like these people.
And that's all fine. There's some people that are not going to be budged off of their position. There are some people who are just mad all the time about everything, and they're pissed off that this is an overpay, and they're going to yell at Dubas, and they're going to say things like Mark Hunter should have been GM. I'm not talking to those people because they're immovable. What I'm just talking about is the Leaf fan, the one who evaluates things like with a little bit of measure, with a little bit of a cool head, and looks at this and says like, and does see the Mitch Marner ad and says,
not so much anymore.
I'm not retweeting this. Like, I'm not sharing this post from Mitch Marner today. Like, I'm sorry.
Will this wear off in like 2 weeks when he scores 20 goals in the first?
They win one cup. You know what? They get to a cup final this year, and it's all gone.
Of course, but that goes without saying. That's like to me, like that's everything. It's like, well, if they win a Stanley Cup,
murdered one hobo, but the cup, that was pretty good.
Yeah, I find it. You're right. I find it a little bit harder to swallow that type of advertising of that player when we know that he turned down an extra year to be here at the same amount of money.
You certainly can't sell the angle of like the do anything to be here guy. You can sell him as an awesome hockey player or whatever.
No.
Cool kid.
I would love to have seen the war room, the Marner war room, when Elliot Friedman's 31 Thoughts came out with the number of 11 million over 7. They're like,
oh God.
All right, what do we do? Well, we certainly can't sign exactly that. That's too obvious. 1 year less.
I got to say, too, just quickly, because we've been getting a lot of tweets, and I'll read this one, too, because I got this one from a regular listener, the Road Guy. He says, it means more to you and the fans to play in Toronto, not the players. It doesn't. It's not a factor. Ask former Maple Leafs that question.
Yeah.
Like, honestly.
There are people who come through Toronto, play a season or two, who it doesn't mean anything to. If people who play their years here and their name becomes recognized, it's everything.
Ask most of the guys that we know who didn't play here. Their number one thing is them lamenting about how they wish they played here.
And the guys that did play here are tough to get on the radio to talk about it because they're such giant celebrities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's a really good point.
It's true.
And I mean, they got all their Stanley Cup rings that they're wearing on their fingers, so you get it.
I think the point is that, you're right in the sense that it didn't translate to cap savings, which is surprising, but that historically, no, most people, it has been impressed upon them the value of playing here. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen with this group. And it didn't happen with the hometown kid, who everyone during William Nylander's negotiations and holdouts, it was, well, Marner's never going to do this. And then he did it, but worse.
Yeah.
He's wearing...
I take a small amount of satisfaction in that, by the way.
Of course. Who doesn't?
Because Willie was getting kicked to the curb as this Euro whatever. And it was like, no.
Whoever thought that Michael Nylander would be the less popular father in the market? Like whoever, that was the upset of the century.
The upset, yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't see it coming.